introduction. He was our party chair for a long time and has steered the party through lots of discussions of issues around sort of public ownership and cooperative models and mutualisation. So needs very little introduction, I'm sure, for both of you. Gareth, can I ask you to unmute and hand over to just kick us off on the discussion of what is this sewage scandal? Why is private ownership part of the problem? And how can our co-op values help to make a better system?
Thanks very much. I'm rarely allowed out into sort of co-op party settings anymore, being the sort of bad smell of the previous regime. So it's lovely to get an airing once more in a co-op party setting. And to Anna and to Izzy, thanks very much for facilitating the meeting. And then there are at least 3 members of my constituency party on the call. So I'm hoping that you will not allow them to ask any questions, and will instead, the more sophisticated members of the co-op party will instead be allowed to answer questions. I think this is a really important time for the debate about the future of water companies. Yesterday, I was asked for the second time to go through the lobbies to stop sewage being dumped in our rivers and our seas. And anyone who has swam in the sea, who's walked by a river, who's canoed or gone on a boat, anyone who cares about the environment that we live in has a vested interest in trying to tackle the scandal of sewage being dumped in our rivers and in our seas. And to partly understand why we are in the situation we're in, you do have to look at the ownership of the water and waste companies, and wonder whether there is not a lot more that they could be doing. Certainly over the 40 years since the privatization of water companies began, bills have rocketed, and according to research that the University of Greenwich did, the amount that companies have borrowed from the capital markets roughly equates to how much they've paid out in dividends, which does beg the question, when water companies claim that the advantage of privatization was that they were able to offer a more commercial operation and to borrow money on the markets for investment in the company. It does make you wonder whether actually that is what they have done, and whether or not that money has instead been siphoned off to pay private companies. So bills have gone up. The debt of water companies has increased substantially, and what we're not seeing is the scale of investment by water companies and waste companies to stop sewage being dumped in our rivers and our streams. And if you think about the rise in appetite for people to swim in rivers, to canoe in rivers, to take advantage of the environment, which certainly came to light even more so than usual during COVID. Surely, as a political party, we have a responsibility, along with our friends in the Labour Party, to think about how you tackle that scandal of water ownership and what it means for our environment and our water companies. The debate in the Labour Party has taken a similar vein, and such is the nature of where we've got to, I think, on the left and the centre left. That it's difficult to find anybody who thinks that the privatization of water companies has been a good thing, and that the current ownership model is working in the interests of us as customers. The issue is, what do you do about that ownership model? And at the last general election, Labour stood on a manifesto of taking back into public hands the water companies through a route of nationalisation. Now, I was a loyal member of the Labour Party and I stood on that manifesto, but I have to say I've always had some doubts as to whether nationalisation was the best route to bringing back water companies into public hands. I think a mutual model is a much better way forward. And let me just pay tribute to the work that Anna and the Co-op Party staff team did 4 or 5 years ago now, on looking at public ownership of water, amongst other things, and how to bring mutual models into use in that sector. Why do I think a mutual model would work better? Well, first of all, we have a tried and tested example of a mutual business, Welsh Water, in this environment already. And Welsh Water has consistently led the way in terms of customer satisfaction out of all the water companies in the UK. It is one of only 2 water companies that, in real terms, have reduced their bills to customers, and it ranks well across a whole range of indicators and data sets for its performance. And what is striking about that is that when Welsh Water, when Glas Cymru, who own Welsh Water, was set up, they had to take on a huge amount of corporate debt, and so there was quite a bit of skepticism, not only in government circles at the time, but in the city amongst those who were lending, to Welsh Water, or who looked at the case for lending to Welsh Water, as to whether or not the model could actually work in the long run. And what, over the last 20 years, Glas Cymru and Welsh Water have proved is that the model does work. They have reduced down the amount of debt that they hold, and still managed to perform highly effectively for customers, and do very well in terms of a range of other environmental and water quality indicators as well. They're not perfect. I wouldn't want to suggest that to you, but a fascinating report brought out by Oxford University in January this year looks back at their history, looks at their performance in comparison to the rest of the English water companies, and demonstrates how well Welsh Water have done in comparison. Now, it's not the model of ownership of Welsh Water is not exactly as certainly we suggested in the Co-op Party report. It's effectively owned by a group of stakeholders, roughly 250 stakeholders, where I personally think what we'd want is, in the long run, is for water companies to be owned by all the consumers who benefit from that water company's services, and the employees who work in the business. But crucially, Welsh Water under Glas Cymru have demonstrated that a mutual model can work, can be effective, can deliver good value for money, and a high quality performance for customers, and on water and environmental quality indicators. Why do I think that's better than nationalisation? I think there's a number of reasons. I'm not sure we want water companies effectively to be at the beck and call of civil servants in Whitehall, good as and talented as much of the civil service is, because that way surely risks as much a lack of transparency about the decisions those water companies make as we have with private shareholders. Sure, there'll be politicians having to take responsibility for the performance of those water companies, but many of the crucial decisions would be taken not by consumers, but by civil servants. Far better, I think, that we have the people who, in the end, matter most to the business, the employees, and who depend on the company the most, consumers, having the ultimate say in running the business. I think there's a risk that you'd see a cycle of privatisation and nationalisation, privatisation and nationalisation, again, given the Tories' refusal to accept that the privatisation of water has failed. And then I think there's a risk about whether you get the level of investment into the water industry that you need to tackle the sewage and other challenges that the companies face. Water leakages, for example, continue to be a big issue as well, because if they were nationalised, then water companies would be, the investment by water companies would count towards public spending, and inevitably a Chancellor of the Exchequer would have to place investment in the water industry up against, say, the needs of investment in childcare or pensions or schools or hospitals, etc. The advantage of them staying in the private sector, albeit run on mutual terms, is that they can still borrow on commercial terms in the private sector, but there wouldn't be any private shareholders, so that money wouldn't be used to pay dividends as it is being used at the moment, but could be used to fund improvements in service quality and or lower bills. So there is it seems to me, a great opportunity to influence the debate about the future of the water industry going forward. Personally, I think there will be a number of steps that you'd need to take before you announced full-scale mutual models. I certainly think the amendments that Luke Pollard proposed on behalf of the Labour Party, who's a good Co-op MP yesterday, to ratchet up the pressure on the water companies before mutual ownership took place, is a good step. I think there needs to be customer groups set up at each water company, having to be consulted on the investment plans of the water companies, and perhaps having to approve the pay of the chief executive and the board. We just need to increase the pressure up. We need to build a culture of consumers having a say in water companies before ultimately you move to full ownership by consumers and a mutual model being in place. But that is a debate that needs to be had a bit more, and a bit more work to be done on it. But I hope, friends, that is a reasonable introduction to the case for mutualisation, and happy to do my best to answer any questions. And if there are difficult ones, as Anna wrote the report, you can always ask her for an answer too. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gareth. And that was a very comprehensive If Whistle Stop tour. And so, as you mentioned, the publication, I popped the link into the chat for people. We've had a couple of questions on what a mutually owned company means in practice. So hopefully that link will sort of help clarify what it means. But what we mean is something that's owned by its consumers, and so the people who pay water bills, and its employees, and that as we believe in co-ops, it would be a democratic participatory structure that allows decisions to be made by people who rely on the water company rather than people who derive shareholder value from it. But do have a look at the link, and happy to take questions going on. I've had a couple of questions in the chat, and I can see Andrea and Kavan have hands up as well. One in the chat was from Jenifer Budden. South West Water has always had high bills. I agree with mutual models, but how do we make sure that we have proper funding so that bills are affordable? Would the money just work out because there are no dividends, or are there other issues around funding that we need to also be addressing? We have a question from Councillor Andy Furlong, who's forwarded me some really great work he's been doing trying to hold Southern Water to account, and it's sort of finding it very hard to get answers about sewage that's been dumped, and asking a question: if this is an issue that Co-op Party members and councillors are going to campaign on, is there an easier way than sort of freedom of information request to find out what the water companies are doing? And if not, how can we make that accountability easier while we push for these mutual models? So I don't know if you want to start with them, and then I'll take Andrea, Kavan and Jenifer in quick succession, and we'll do those three together in the round, and then we'll let you disappear for your votes.
In terms of campaigning, there are a small number of regional water consumer bodies. And so people who want to campaign on these issues could look to get involved in those regional water consumer bodies, or if they've got Labour MPs, ask Labour MPs to table questions on these issues, but also write direct to the chief executive and let Anna and I and Luke Pollard have copies of the responses that you get, because this is an issue we're lucky to have in Luke Pollard, who's the Shadow Environment Secretary of State, a Co-op MP who's interested in these issues and has spoken in debates before he became important as well. So there are lots of ways, and the more people who are willing to get involved and ask questions, the better. On the financial needs of businesses, I mean, the beautiful thing about mutualizing water companies is that they are both publicly owned, in that you and I would be able to have a direct say in the running of the service that we depend on. But they are also in the private sector, so they can still borrow money on the capital markets and use that money for a social purpose. Whereas at the moment, the water companies that are doing it are using it to give a dividend to their shareholders, many of whom are not British, are funds from overseas and elsewhere. So you can still raise the money you need for investment using the mutual model. You're not restricted in a way that you would be if it was simply nationalised.
Great. So, Andrea, I'm going to ask you to unmute first. You should have had something pop up to let you jump in. And Kavan and Jenifer, I've sent you the unmute buttons ready to go. Andrea, over to you.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to, hello, Gareth.
Hi, Andrea. Nice to see you again.
I live in a tourist area. I mean, a lot of people do, I realise this, but sewage has been a big issue. And I would say that we're less likely to get mutualisation of the water with this government, but present government, but we'll be relying on you to push on these issues. And I just got a question, really. What do people do if they've become sick, or I know someone whose animal's been very sick and they've spent a lot in vet bills because of the sickness due to the sewage in the water. What redress? I mean, I've told them to complain to the MP, the council, complain to everybody, the water company, everybody involved, but what would you say?
Andrew, I'd say all of those things. I'd say as well, complain direct to the company and complain to the Consumer Council that covers the area in which the farmer lives. Definitely write to your MP, and if they think they've got a strong case and can back it up with evidence, then send it through to Luke Pollard and the Shadow DEFRA team, because we need some of those examples as well. And if we can bring in other bodies, if they're a farmer and they can get the National Farmers Union involved as well, and you can build a coalition of concern, that helps to strengthen the argument for the types of solutions that we're beginning to discuss here. And I think is a very simple message, Andrea, that you can push at your MP and can push at friends, etc. Consumers should have a say. So why shouldn't you be able to? Why shouldn't there be a committee of consumers who can speak to the board, potentially who can ultimately have a voice on the board? We're talking about the short term. Why shouldn't you be able to communicate directly through a group that the board have to work with? That might help to stop examples of sewage being dumped or the farmers' cattle getting poisoned. These are some of the questions to ask MPs and the water companies themselves.
I think, do as Gareth says, if there are these examples of impacts or actions you're taking, whether it's FOIs or emails to the chief exec or sort of complaints because someone or their animals have gotten sick, pass them on over. You can email me at policy@party.coop, or Gareth's parliamentary email is publicly available, so do dig it out, and I can pass anything on as well. Kavan, do you want to jump in next?
Thank you. In terms of regulating the actual water companies when they've been mutualised, how do we agree on set standards for water quality, preventing sewage from being discharged into rivers, and also plan for future infrastructure projects as well, so that we get the financing to get things like sewers replaced, new water pipes laid in streets, all the kind of bread and butter issues that you get with water companies. And also, I'd like to ask as well, in terms of poorer customers or people on low wages, what kind of assistance can we provide to them? Can we provide like a similar scheme to what companies like Severn Trent do, for like things like the Big Difference scheme, where you can actually reduce people's bills if they're out of work or in between jobs, or if they're pensioners, and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Kavan, Welsh Water under Glastonbury have led the way in doing social tariffs and in reducing, in real terms, the bill, the average household bill that people are paying. If you're interested in doing some more reading around this beyond the report that Anna published, there's a great report published by the University of Oxford and the Side Business School, which looks specifically at Glastonbury and Welsh Water. It was published in January of this year. And if I were technically gifted, which I'm not, I would put it in the chat. But that charts the each of the different water companies and their performance in terms of helping customers directly. Under a mutual model, on your broader question about the bread and butter investment that's needed to fix leaky pipes, stop sewage going in, every water company that was mutualised would still have to have an investment plan, and we would still need, it seems to me, a regulatory body such as Ofwat, albeit substantially reformed, to have more vigorous investment targets for fixing those leaky pipes and stopping that dumping of sewage. It's just that consumers would be able to help to determine the priorities, and instead of private shareholders marking the performance card of the chief executive for how much money they get as dividends, consumers would be able to mark the performance card of that chief executive for how much they invest in tackling those leaky pipes and stopping the dumping of sewage.
And last but not least, Jenifer.
Okay. Well, hello, and hello, Gareth. I'm not just down the road for you in what's now called Three Rivers, but perhaps should be renamed Three Sewers, because there used to be lovely streams and things running through Rickmansworth that children paddled in. I don't know where all this extra sewage has come from. I know we've got more people, but there never used to be sewage dumped in these rivers. Local people have been posting up photographs of the rivers, which actually do look like sewers, quite honestly. But what I really want to know is, first of all, there is talk going on about how much all this is going to cost to stop dumping sewage. Why should that be a problem for the government? I would have thought it's a problem for the shareholders at the moment, who've been making vast fortunes out of it. It's not our problem to solve their problems with our money. They should pay to sort themselves out. The other thing I wanted to ask, and I like the idea, thank you, Gareth, about the mutualisation. When places like Birmingham, as I believe, unless my geography's gone completely askew, get their water not from anywhere nearby, but get it from Wales, how quite would that work? Because they've got vast reservoirs in Wales where they get their water. But how would that work out on the mutualised, localised system? Thank you.
Well, just to start with your last question, I mean, there is a process of cooperation between the water companies at the moment. So when there are if there were to be a shortage in a particular area, then water can be supplied to another area to help. And you'd still, under a mutual model, you'd still have that sort of cooperation in place. It's one of the reasons why you do need a regulatory body such as Ofwat to help with the coordination of that. What was interesting about the data about how much it would cost to stop the dumping of sewage is that the first set of figures that the water companies put out were very quickly ridiculed, and a well-placed leak revealed that the real cost was probably going to be substantially lower. And it's about that trade-off between wanting to give private shareholders a dividend payment for their ownership of the business, as opposed to using that money for investment in tackling sewage. If you take the shareholders out of the piece, if you mutualize it or you bring it into public ownership run by consumers, you take that need to give money to shareholders away, and you can concentrate on putting the money where it's most needed to stop the leaky pipes and to stop the dumping of sewage.
Great, thank you. And sort of comprehensive answers and ones that I'm happy to sort of flesh out I think this is a topic ripe for further discussion. You know, there's lots of questions, and the chat has been going crazy with people getting in touch with wanting examples from other countries, wanting to understand the model more. So I'm going to take that away, and Izzy and I can talk about how we can do more around this subject. I think it's incredibly topical and so important to not just to fix the problem of sewage dumped in our rivers, but also, you know, this is an issue affecting people regardless of whether they live in Labour or Tory areas. It's something that as a movement we need to be able to communicate and champion sort of cooperative models and ways in which we could create something better and fairer. So I think it's a rich seam of activity for us together, Gareth, and I think we've got sort of evidence of enthusiasm from our members. I'm conscious that you've got some votes tonight, so I'm not going to hold you much longer other than to say thank you. I've been making a note of the questions, and if you do find that report, Gareth, that you mentioned and want to drop it over in an email when you get a moment, I'll happily circulate it to those on the call so you can have a further read, if that sounds helpful.
I will sort that out tomorrow and ping it across to you, Anna.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Brilliant.
Thanks for your interest, everybody.
No,
Cheers
thank
for
you
now.
very much. Great, and I think, Izzy, we'll call it an evening for today. That was a really great Zoom. Thank you, everybody, for taking part, and I hope to see you again soon.